Unearthed, my deceased wife's hidden diaries, uncovering her secret family and a tragic love story unbeknownst to any of us. I'm writing this about something that happened at church involving my 12-year-old nephew, and what he shared with me over the phone. Every few months, his church organizes this event called Youth Sunday. On that day, the youth pastor steps up to give the sermon for the adults, the youth band handles all the worship music to let the regular worship team rest, and the young people announce events, pass around the tithe baskets, and someone usually performs a song while the baskets are being passed. This time, that someone was supposed to be my nephew on June 15th. He was going to play a worship song on the piano, which would have been his very first time performing for the adult service. He'd been taking piano lessons for a few years and had performed at recitals, but never in front of as many people as their church packs in. There are 2 services, and the place holds over 1,000. He's not even part of the youth band, so this was a huge deal for him. But when the big moment came and he sat down at the piano bench, the nerves hit him hard. He started crying right there, unable to play, overwhelmed and embarrassed in front of everyone. One of the youth leaders came over, tried to calm him down, offered comfort, but he just couldn't collect himself enough to go through with it. The congregation was supportive beyond anything I expected. They gave him a standing ovation as the youth leader gently led him off stage. My nephew called me last week, still dealing with the aftermath, and wanted to vent. That phone call was eye-opening. All week, he said, he'd been angry with himself, but also motivated. He wanted to try again when the next Youth Sunday came around and even got the youth pastor's blessing to play the same song next time. He sounded determined, ready to redeem himself, and his mom was all for it. But the problem arose when he asked his dad for permission. His father flat out said no. This decision sparked arguments with his mom, who felt just as strongly as my nephew did that he should have another shot. My nephew and his mom kept trying to convince his dad, but he wouldn't move. He called me hoping I'd have some insight, maybe even help sway things, and even though I'm not a Christian anymore, though I grew up religious, I could see how powerful this moment could be for him, the personal redemption and the example it might set for others. I couldn't wrap my head around why my brother wouldn't support him. So I decided to call my brother and ask him directly. He explained his reasoning. Allowing him to play again wouldn't be about God anymore, it would be about redemption or personal pride, and he thought that wasn't the right motivation for a church setting. He suggested my nephew find that sort of redemption elsewhere, like at a piano recital not held at church. I kept pressing him, trying to explain how amazing it was that his son was so motivated and that he wanted to face his fears. I pointed out that church is literally a place for redemption, and that witnessing someone overcome something difficult can inspire more than just the performer. He just kept pushing back, saying I didn't understand and this wasn't any of my concern. But I couldn't help but say how baffling it was that I even had to fight this hard for him to simply support his own son's courage. After that call, I checked in with my nephew again. He told me that his dad had decided to inform the youth pastor himself about his final decision. It just breaks my heart to see my nephew's determination run up against this wall, especially when everyone else at that church had his back. Update 1. I was deeply emotional when my nephew called me. He couldn't reach his parents and turned to me, and in that moment, I felt compelled to step in and at least reach out to my brother. Despite the nagging voice in my head telling me it might not be my place, I pushed past that doubt, driven purely by my emotions and concern. Later, reflecting on how maybe I had overstepped, I decided to call my brother back and apologize for inserting myself into his family matters. He never asked for my input, and I realized it might not have been my place to offer it. When we spoke again, I noticed a shift in his tone from the first time. I apologized for pushing my opinions onto him, recognizing that it wasn't my role to dictate how he should handle his son. Surprisingly, he appreciated the call, and as we talked, he began to open up more. He explained that after reflecting on our conversation, he realized why I felt compelled to get involved. His son had made it my business by reaching out in the first place. He admitted that was fair and wanted to clarify where he was coming from. He explained he had spoken to his son about the importance of respecting parental decisions, how, as parents, it's widely considered disrespectful for a child to go parent shopping when they don't get the answer they want, like asking mom after dad already said no. Then he told me why he planned to say no to the youth pastor's offer to let his son try again at church. His reasoning was that his son needed to learn that second chances aren't guaranteed in life. I couldn't help but push back. I argued that church is supposed to be a family, a place where people build each other up and want to see each other succeed. The Bible literally says to encourage one another and build each other up, 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Wasn't this the perfect moment to let God use his son's perseverance as a testimony to inspire? I reminded him of that old VeggieTales movie about Jonah, all about how God gives second chances, which is really all his son was asking for. He stayed firm, telling me church wasn't the place for this kind of lesson. Church was supposed to be about God, not second chances for performance. So I asked, why did the youth pastor say yes if it wasn't God's will? That's when the truth came out. He revealed that it was the standing ovation his son received that upset him most, something he hadn't mentioned before. He felt his son didn't deserve that ovation since he didn't even get the chance to perform. He compared it to a participation trophy and admitted it embarrassed him, especially when people approached his son after the service to offer encouragement. I tried to explain that people just wanted to lift up a young member of the congregation, They wanted to encourage him, not hand him an empty reward. My brother didn't agree. He felt his son wouldn't learn if there weren't consequences, and being told he'd get another chance just a few days later at youth group was unrealistic. That's not how life works, he insisted, saying he planned to talk with the youth pastor about it, and that was that. I told him, respectfully, that I disagreed, but I promised not to bring the subject up again. I did suggest he get another perspective from someone else in the church before confronting the youth pastor, but he dismissed the idea, saying he saw no need. He thanked me for calling and that was the end of it. Even though it feels like a missed opportunity, I've accepted there's nothing more for me to do, nor should I do anything else. I just hope other chances will come for my nephew. Funny enough, I thought about how I used all that Christian talk to try to convince my brother, even though I personally walked away from the faith years ago. Part of my drive came from hearing a coworker vent about his own son. That boy was smart and driven, graduated high school with honors, enrolled in community college on the honors track, planning to transfer to a top university. But then he dropped out, overwhelmed by life and addiction, refusing to work or pay rent despite still living with his parents. It's been nearly 2 years since he attended class, and now his own family is divided over whether to evict him. All that potential just faded away. So, when my nephew called, ashamed by his own fear and desperately wanting another shot, I truly felt he deserved a second chance. I've seen how a moment like this, being allowed to get back up after falling, could become a pivotal memory he'll draw strength from someday when life throws other challenges his way. Withholding that second chance might stunt his growth and confidence. My coworker's son lost his motivation so quickly. It's easy to take a kid's drive for granted when it's there. I wish I'd remembered to tell my brother this story, but maybe it wouldn't have changed his mind. Still, I can't help wondering if his embarrassment over the standing ovation was the real reason he put his foot down, and I just hope he keeps his son's best interests above his own pride. Update 2. The other day, my nephew called me, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, to let me know that my brother had spoken to the youth pastor and requested that he be removed from July's Youth Sunday lineup. He would have performed the same song again while the tithe baskets were being passed, a chance for redemption after a previous stumble. According to my nephew, my brother told the youth pastor that God told him my nephew wasn't ready. He echoed the same thing to my nephew, saying he needed more time, that he shouldn't rush back into it. The youth pastor simply complied and took him off the July schedule but kindly suggested that he could try again in August if that felt right. As my nephew relayed all of this, I did my best to encourage him, but the frustration bubbled inside me. Before this all unfolded, I'd received messages from other adults, parents, in fact, saying that they hoped members of their own family would hold them accountable if they were making mistakes with their children. It made me reflect on what my responsibility here really was. Yes, I know, my brother has every right to manage his own family's affairs, but when a child reaches out for support about something that's not inherently wrong, I feel like the adult thing to do is listen, guide, and, where appropriate, check in with the parents unless there's some secret or abuse at play. In my nephew's situation, I can't see any downside to the encouragement the church was offering. A chance to make a cherished memory, a moment of growth and redemption. The youth pastor was all for another shot, but my brother spouted spiritual platitudes, claiming God told him otherwise, as a mask for his own insecurity. I find it hypocritical, honestly. Why does my brother's embarrassment override the youth pastor's blessing? Does the youth pastor not have a connection to God too, or does that only apply when my brother deems it convenient? The whole thing gnawed at me even more when I considered the way my brother twisted theology to justify his actions. By telling his son you don't always get second chances, especially in a church context, he's undermining the very premise of Christianity itself. If humanity hadn't been given a second chance after the first sin in Genesis, the entire faith wouldn't exist as it does now. God sending Jesus into the world is the greatest story of a second chance, and here's my brother, his son's gatekeeper, teaching the opposite message inside the walls of their church. On my latest call with my nephew, I sensed a change. The lightness was gone. He told me that when he asked my brother if he could play in August Youth Sunday, he was told no. When he asked for a timeline, he got nothing, a vague until I say otherwise. After more shouting at home and endless, invisible deadlines, my nephew finally decided he just didn't want to play piano in church anymore. He told his dad, who surprisingly agreed, saying the point of church was to focus on God and not anything else. I could hear the exhaustion in my nephew's voice. He told me he was tired of the yelling, tired of waiting for his dad to move the goalposts yet again. Even his mom, who once was open to giving him another shot, had now aligned herself with my brother's reasoning. All that, and for what? My nephew just wanted to try again and move past his fear. I tried to rally him, to point the drive towards something new, another recital, maybe, where I promised I'd show up and cheer him on. I told him he'd done nothing wrong. Even adults get stage fright, but you find out what you're made of and how you pick yourself up. I tossed in a sports analogy. Peyton Manning, denied a second chance with the Colts, released after an injury, only to rise again with the Broncos and win a Super Bowl after MVP-worthy seasons. Sometimes, you prove your doubters wrong somewhere else. I promised the next time we saw each other we'd go for ice cream or a movie, whatever he wanted. I don't get to see their family outside of holidays because of the distance, but I'm seriously considering taking time off to get out there sooner, just to lift his spirits. He deserves that distraction, and if I can snag him the new Nintendo device, I will, though those things are impossible to find right now. I've been turning over more ideas too, hoping something will bring a genuine smile back to his face. As for my brother, I debated whether I should pick up the phone and let him have it, or at least talk this out. I ended up choosing email because I needed to organize my thoughts properly. I wrote to him, acknowledging that it's not my place to tell him how to parent, but I felt compelled to offer my perspective one last time. I gently reminded him, in a much softer tone than I've used in my private venting, that Christianity is supposed to be about second chances, about grace. I urged him to consider speaking with someone else at church, to get another godly opinion, since the church itself seemed in full support of his son. Even if he wouldn't play in July, I encouraged him to let the boy try again in August, so he wouldn't grow resentful or disconnected from either the church or his family. If my nephew ends up walking away from Christianity, he'd have every right to, for any reason he chooses, but it would break my heart if it was from something as small and sad as his father's ego. I'm still waiting to hear back. My brother hasn't replied, and it's been days since I sent that message. I wanted to be harsher, to call out the damage caused when people use God as a cover for their own anxieties and need for control. But in the end, I just hope my words give him pause. People like him are the reason faith gets a bad reputation and good kids start to drift away. Update 3. My brother finally responded to the email I sent him, though, instead of replying the way I expected, he shot me a terse text. He told me how disappointed he was that I brought up the topic again, saying he thought our previous call would have been the end of it. Then he tried to tell me I had no right to use the Bible in trying to convince him, not when I'm not a practicing Christian myself. He insisted that he never tells me how to live and demanded I drop the subject and never mention it again. I haven't answered him yet, but I did talk to my nephew again about the tough decision he'd recently made. He opened up to me further, telling me that he decided to stop playing piano altogether, and for more reasons than I'd realized. He had told me before about the yelling that would break out when he dared to ask his dad if he could play again. What I hadn't known was that he once approached his youth pastor, asking if he could try again after my brother had said no. When his dad found out the youth pastor gave him permission, he was punished for it. My brother took his video game device away for several days, only returning it after a while. Losing something so important to him for just wanting to play had killed his drive for weeks, and now he's decided to quit piano entirely. When my nephew finally broke the news to his parents, my brother simply agreed with his decision, though his mother wasn't on board. He told me he was deeply embarrassed after my brother confronted the youth pastor about him asking to play again, painting him as disobedient. Apparently, that was all it took for the youth pastor to decide he shouldn't be in the lineup anymore. It hurt to learn my nephew hadn't told me everything, that my brother had already said no before he asked the youth pastor. Still, I firmly believe my brother is wrong. My nephew should have been commended for wanting to try, yet instead, he was punished and had the passion crushed out of him. Who could blame him for not wanting to continue, having to face such spite and discouragement at home? I only just recently learned from my nephew that my brother even encouraged him to take a break from piano lessons. I had no idea until our last conversation. He also confessed that he no longer wanted to attend youth group after the humiliating fallout. Once more, my brother agreed. My nephew didn't have to go to youth group or even that church on Sundays anymore. They'd look for a new youth group in a new community, he said, so that my nephew could have a fresh start, and so the church chatter about him returning to piano would finally die down. My brother has switched churches multiple times over the years, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it again. Sure, he's committed because he teaches there, but knowing him, I'd bet he leaves eventually. Yet, I find it heartbreaking that my nephew is losing a church community that was genuinely supportive and healthy, a rarity these days. These people gave him a standing ovation after he failed, showing the unconditional love that's supposed to represent Jesus. That sort of grace shouldn't be taken for granted. I tried to encourage my nephew not to let all this drama steal his love for the piano, but his decision was already made by the time we talked. I've already made plans to take time off and visit him over Labor Day weekend. I hope to lift him up in person, because God knows he needs someone in his corner right now. He told me he just wants to move on, and honestly, who could blame him? I went back and forth about whether I should tell others in the family about the way my brother destroyed his own son's passion, but I held my tongue. My nephew wants to move past it, and stirring the pot could make things even harder for him at home if anyone suspected he'd told me everything. Instead, I'm looking into counseling, hoping a professional can help me figure out the best way to support him moving forward. I probably won't have that set up before my visit, but I want to be ready for the long haul, because I doubt this will be the last issue he faces with my brother and his wife. And as for my brother, well, I'd already lost respect for his politics lately. He never missed an opportunity to drag me into uncomfortable conversations, even when I clearly told him I didn't want to hear about it. Funny how no only counts when it comes from him, right? Now, with all of this, I've lost even more respect for him. He's dead to me after the way he's treated his own son. But I'm biting my tongue, holding in the urge to unleash my rage, because the last thing I want is to be cut off from my nephew, who still feels safe enough to confide in me. He's not getting the support he deserves from his parents, so staying connected to him is more important now than ever. For his future, I have to be the one person he knows will always have his back. Update 4. Whenever I drive out to see my brother, whether it's for the holidays or just a visit during the year, I always give him a heads up about the weekend I'm thinking of. It's a little routine we've followed for years, and it helps us plan activities together. This time was no different. I told him early on that I could come for Labor Day weekend, and he seemed genuinely cool with it. We even traded a few texts confirming the plan. But just a few days ago, everything changed. Suddenly, he sent me a new message apologizing for the last-minute shift. He said he didn't think it was a good idea for me to visit after what happened with what he vaguely referred to as the church situation. He told me point blank that if I came anyway, we wouldn't hang out, and I couldn't stay with them at all. For years, they'd saved me money by letting me sleep in the family room, one of those couches that folds out into a bed, but now that door was shut, for Labor Day, at least. This was the first time in my life he's ever told me I couldn't come. Needing to hear it from him directly, I called. He didn't just reiterate his message, he doubled down. He said I shouldn't talk to my nephew over the phone for the time being and told my nephew not to call me either. I argued, telling him that didn't feel right, but he said he'd know if I tried to contact my nephew. I'm aware there are parental controls on my nephew's phone, so he probably would. At this point, I realized I couldn't keep pushing without risking even further alienation, especially since I worry there's a lot more going on beneath the surface, yelling, things my nephew hinted at when talking about the incident that kicked all this off. So, I've made the decision not to communicate further until I speak with a counselor. My priority now has to be figuring out how I can best support my nephew, now and down the line, without making a mistake that might get me permanently cut off. Everything already feels like it's hanging by a thread. I've scheduled an appointment with my doctor to see if I can get a referral to a therapist more quickly, and I'm searching for online options, too. I need real guidance before I make any move, because if my nephew ever needs me, I want to be someone he can count on. Update 5. I had my first session with a therapist last week, and it was eye-opening in ways I didn't expect. Dr. Martinez helped me see that I needed to step back and focus on documenting everything rather than trying to fix the situation immediately. She suggested I keep a record of all my conversations with my nephew and any concerning behaviors I observe, just in case things escalate further down the line. But then something happened that completely blindsided me. My nephew found a way to reach out to me through a friend's phone while he was at school. He was whispering and clearly panicked, telling me he had something important to share but couldn't talk long. What he told me made my blood run cold. Apparently, the real reason my brother didn't want him playing piano at church had nothing to do with God's will or teaching life lessons. My nephew overheard a heated argument between his parents late one night. His mom was crying, accusing my brother of being jealous of their son's talent because he himself had always wanted to be musical but never had the ability. She said he was projecting his own failures onto their child and that she was sick of watching him tear down everything good in this house. Then she said something that floored me, just like you did with Sarah. Sarah is my brother's sister-in-law, his wife's younger sister. I'd always wondered why she stopped coming around for family gatherings about 2 years ago. My nephew said his mom mentioned that my brother had driven Sarah away too when she was trying to pursue her art career, calling her dreams unrealistic and attention-seeking until she eventually gave up and moved across the country. But here's where it gets really complicated. My nephew then told me something that made me question everything I thought I knew about my brother's marriage. He said his parents have been sleeping in separate bedrooms for months, and that his mom has been getting mystery phone calls that she takes outside in the driveway late at night. When his dad confronted her about it, she told him it was none of his business and that she was done pretending everything was fine. The call got cut short when my nephew heard footsteps in the hallway, but before hanging up, he whispered that his mom had been asking him if he'd want to spend more time with her side of the family, specifically his Aunt Sarah, who apparently has been reaching out wanting to reconnect. I'm sitting here trying to process all of this. Is my sister-in-law having an affair? Is she planning to leave my brother? And if so, where does that leave my nephew caught in the middle of what seems like an increasingly toxic household? Dr. Martinez was right about documenting everything, but now I'm wondering if there's something much darker happening here than just a controlling father crushing his son's dreams. My nephew sounded scared, not just disappointed, and I can't shake the feeling that the piano incident was just the tip of the iceberg. I've been debating whether to try reaching out to Sarah directly, but I don't even have her contact information. Part of me wonders if my nephew's mom is using Sarah as an escape route, and honestly, after seeing how my brother treats his own son, I can't say I'd blame her. The therapist wants to see me again this week. I think I'm going to need it. Update 6. I never expected to write another update so soon, but everything exploded this past weekend in ways I couldn't have imagined. Dr. Martinez was absolutely right about documenting everything. I'm grateful I started keeping detailed notes because what happened next reads like something out of a soap opera. It started Friday evening when I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was Sarah, my brother's sister-in-law who supposedly moved across the country 2 years ago. Except she wasn't calling from across the country. She was calling from a hotel 15 minutes away from my brother's house, and she had been secretly staying there for the past 3 weeks. I need to tell you what's really been happening, she said, her voice shaking. Your nephew called me through his mom's phone last month. He told me about the piano situation, but also about how his dad has been treating him. I couldn't stay away anymore. What Sarah told me next completely reframed everything I thought I knew. She hadn't just moved away because my brother crushed her art dreams. She'd left because he'd been systematically manipulating and emotionally abusing not just her, but his entire family for years. The piano incident wasn't isolated, it was part of a pattern. Sarah explained that my brother had always been threatened by anyone in the family showing talent or independence. When she was living with them temporarily after college, pursuing freelance graphic design, he'd constantly undermine her work, tell clients who called that she was unreliable, and even deleted portfolio files from her laptop, claiming it was an accident. But the final straw came when she landed a major project with a local business. My brother actually called the client and told them Sarah had a history of mental health issues and couldn't be trusted with deadlines. She lost the contract and her reputation in town was destroyed. I tried to tell your sister-in-law what he was doing, Sarah said, but he had her convinced I was jealous and trying to cause problems. It wasn't until recently that she started seeing the pattern with how he treats your nephew. Then Sarah dropped the bombshell. My sister-in-law had been secretly working with a divorce attorney for 2 months. The late-night phone calls weren't an affair, they were strategy sessions with her lawyer and Sarah, who had been helping her document my brother's controlling behavior and gather evidence for custody proceedings. She's been terrified to leave because your brother has convinced her that no court would give her custody, Sarah explained. He's made her believe she's a bad mother, that she enables your nephew's weakness, and that he's the stable, religious parent any judge would favor. But here's where it gets complicated. My sister-in-law had been planning to wait until after the holidays to file, but something happened Saturday morning that accelerated everything. My nephew had apparently been secretly practicing piano at school during lunch breaks, and his music teacher noticed. She was so impressed that she submitted a recording of him playing to a regional youth competition without telling anyone. Saturday morning, they called to inform him that he'd won first place and would be performing at a state-level showcase next month. When my nephew excitedly told his parents, instead of celebrating, my brother flew into a rage. According to Sarah, who heard all this from my sister-in-law, he accused my nephew of going behind his back and being deceitful and manipulative. But what really set him off was learning that the music teacher had listed me as an emergency contact on the competition entry. Apparently my nephew had given her my number months ago when they first started working together during lunch. That's when my brother completely lost it. He demanded my nephew's phone, discovered the secret calls we'd had, and started screaming about me poisoning his son against him and turning his family into rebellious sinners. My sister-in-law tried to intervene, which led to the biggest fight they'd had in years. Sarah was actually on the phone with my sister-in-law when it happened. I could hear him yelling that your nephew was contaminated by outside influences and that the whole family needed to cut contact with anyone who wasn't supporting his authority, she told me. That's when your sister-in-law finally snapped and told him she was done. By Sunday evening, my sister-in-law had packed bags for herself and my nephew and moved into the hotel with Sarah. She filed for emergency custody Monday morning, citing emotional abuse and my brother's escalating controlling behavior. The piano competition win and my brother's explosive reaction to it became key evidence in her filing. The most heartbreaking part is what my nephew told Sarah when they were finally alone at the hotel. He said he'd been afraid to tell anyone how bad things had gotten at home because his dad had convinced him that speaking against your father was a sin, and that if he complained, it would prove he was weak and ungrateful. He'd been carrying this burden of shame about the stage fright incident while also believing he deserved to be punished for it. I spoke to my nephew yesterday for the first time in weeks. His voice was different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. He told me he wants to start playing piano again, and he's excited about the state competition next month. He asked if I'd come watch him perform, and I promised I'd be in the front row. My brother has been blowing up my phone since Monday, alternating between rage-filled voicemails where he blames me for destroying his family and weepy messages where he claims everyone has turned against him and he's being persecuted for his faith. I haven't responded to any of them. Dr. Martinez says this is actually a common pattern with controlling personalities. When they lose control, they either escalate their tactics or completely fall apart. My brother seems to be doing both. According to Sarah, he showed up at their hotel Tuesday night, pounding on doors and demanding to talk to his wife. Hotel security had to escort him off the property, and my sister-in-law filed for a restraining order the next morning. The strangest part of all this is how normal everything feels now. My nephew is staying in regular contact, my sister-in-law seems relieved despite the upheaval, and Sarah is talking about moving back to town permanently to help them get settled. It's like this dark cloud that had been hanging over the whole family for years finally lifted. I keep thinking about that coworker I mentioned whose son lost all his motivation and drive. The difference is, my nephew was being systematically broken down by the person who should have been building him up. Now that he's free from that toxic environment, I can already see his natural resilience and joy starting to return. The state piano competition is in 3 weeks. Sarah has been helping him practice, and apparently he sounds better than ever. Sometimes the best second chances come when you finally escape the people who convinced you that you didn't deserve them in the first place.